Dune 2021 is a visually breathtaking adaptation of Frank Herbert's 1965 novel brought to life with meticulous attention to atmosphere, political complexity, and mystic tone. It's a stunning cerebral sci-fi epic that values depth over speed. Director Denis Villeneuve crafts a slow, deliberate narrative that immerses viewers into the desert planet Arrakis, where noble houses battle over the spice, which is the galaxy's most precious resource. Timothée Chalamet delivers a subdued but compelling performance as Paul Atreides, a reluctant heir drawn into a web of prophecy, betrayal, and destiny. Rebecca Ferguson is particularly strong as Lady Jessica, balancing strength and vulnerability in a key role. The supporting cast, including Oscar Isaac, Joshua Brolin, Zendaya, and Stellan Skarsgård, adds gravitas and diversity to a richly layered world. The cinematography by Craig Fraser and the score by Hans Zimmer, which focuses on the rhythm of the human voice, an instrument that will never die out as long as civilization exists, a standout element, contributing to the film's hypnotic and otherworldly tone. Every frame feels epic, with wide desert landscapes and towering ships, evoking a sense of ancient grandeur and futuristic dread. It feels like a visual work of art, masterfully crafted using sand as medium. The achromatic palette and the striking use of silhouette against the minimal monotonous background are truly impressive. That said, Part 1's pacing is slow, and it only tells the first half of the story. For some, it may feel more like a prologue than a complete movie. Characters are introduced but not deeply explored, and viewers unfamiliar with the book may find themselves adrift in names, factions, and vision. Dune Part 2 unleashes a sweeping sci-fi spectacle that surpasses its predecessor in scale, storytelling, and emotional depth. Critics praised its immersive visuals, complex narrative, and powerful thematic resonance, though some noted pacing issues and occasional emotional distance. Denis Villeneuve made his directorial debut in Canada in 1998 with a film titled August 32nd on Earth. He began attracting attention early in his career, including an invitation to the Uncertain Regard section at the Cannes Film Festival. However, after releasing Maelstrom in 2000, he did not direct another feature film for some time. In 2015, he directed Sicario, Day of the Soldado. Sicario was invited to compete at the Cannes Film Festival and received critical acclaim from both audience and critics. It was also a box office success, earning approximately $86 million on a $30 million budget. In terms of cinematic technique, Villeneuve is known for his meticulous attention to mise-en-scène, carefully arranging the composition, perspective, and character placement to reflect the emotional undercurrents and narrative flow of a scene. His signature style features calm, static camera work. He frequently employs overhead shots that resemble satellite imagery, which is an aesthetic often associated with cinematographer Roger Deakins. This visual approach reached new heights in Blade Runner 2049, showcasing the remarkable collaboration between Villeneuve and Deakins. Villeneuve is notably reluctant to use handheld shots, even in scenes with intense urgency. He prefers the restraint of static framing resorting to handheld camera work only when absolutely necessary due to the scene's demand. What truly set Villeneuve apart is his ability to align his visual style with the thematic core of his films. In Sicario, for instance, the ominous score enhances the portrayal of a justice system that operates beyond legality, amplifying the film's psychological tension. Arrival effectively communicates the importance of empathy and understanding through visual storytelling. Blade Runner 2049 uses grand yet bleak music machine-infused sound design and stunning production design to embody the essence of the cyberpunk genre, while also exploring philosophical questions, open to interpretation through rich imagery. With his refined directorial sensibilities and deep thematic awareness, Denis Villeneuve has established himself as one of the most acclaimed and visionary filmmakers in contemporary Hollywood. The film's title, Dune, refers to a sand dune. Frank Herbert, the author of the original novel, was working as a freelance journalist in 1959 when he began researching a magazine article about sand dunes shaped by sea breeze in Oregon, in the northwestern United States. During this research, he became deeply fascinated by desert ecosystems and environment, and this interest would later be reflected in the novel's setting, the desert planet Arrakis. In Denis Villeneuve's Dune 2021, the desert of the planet Arrakis is explored, not just as setting, but as a living force that deeply shapes the story themes, characters, politics, and philosophy. Here's how the desert is explored. The desert is not a passive backdrop. It functions like a character. It's dangerous, vast, deadly, and unpredictable. Sandstorms and giant sandworms make survival difficult. Sacred for the Fremen, the native people of Arrakis, the desert is holy. It represents freedom, tradition, and survival. The desert is a transformative place. Paul Atreides must adapt to the desert, fulfill his destiny. It strips away his aristocratic life and reshapes him into a leader. The desert is the only source of spice melange, a substance critical to space travel, prophecy, and economic dominance. Control over the desert equals control over the universe, making Arrakis the center of imperial exploitation. The struggle over the desert mirrors real-world colonialism, resource extraction, and environmental domination. The Fremen have adapted physically, culturally, and spiritually to the desert. They wear steel suits to recycle moisture from their bodies. They travel silently and skillfully to avoid sandworms. Their deep respect for water and life contrasts with the greed of imperial powers. Their survival is a form of resistance. The desert gives them strength. The desert serves as a place of trial and prophecy. Like a religious desert in history, for example Moses in the Sinai, Jesus in the wilderness, Paul's journey into the desert represents a spiritual transformation. The desert helps awaken Paul's prescient abilities and confront his fate as the Messiah like Kwisatz Haderach. Villeneuve uses huge, wide shots, minimalist sound design, and monumental landscapes to show the desert's scale and silence. The light, color palette, and sound evoke awe, isolation, and terror, underscoring the desert's indifference to human power. In Dune, the desert is a harsh teacher, a spiritual crucible, a political battleground, and a symbol of resistance and change. The worm symbolizes the land's ultimate indifference to empire. It answers only to those who understand it. It transforms Pearl, empowers the Fremen, and resists imperial control, reminding us that true power may come not from dominating the environment, but from understanding and respecting it. The conflict of Arrakis mirrors real-world, colonized history, like a powerful empire invades a land for its resources, such as spice, oil, disregarding its indigenous people like Fremen. It raises questions about feudalistic imperialism, cultural erasures, and extractive capitalism. Who own land? Those who live on it or those who profit from it? Arrakis represents a colonized world, rich in resources like the spice melange, but harsh, desert-covered and populated by indigenous people, the Fremen. The spice melange is the most valuable substance in the universe, just as oil was and still is the lifeblood of industrial and military power. Control of spice means control of space travel, economy and power. The spice rush mirrors real-world resource extraction from colonized lands by foreign powers. The emperor moves noble houses around like colonial administrators, changing who govern Arrakis, just as colonial powers often replaced local rulers or puppet leaders. The Fremen are caught in the middle of this political game. Neither the Atreides nor Harkonnens initially respect Fremen autonomy, until Paul uses their culture for his rise. The Bene Gesserit seeded purposes among native peoples to create religious control, manipulating belief systems long before outsiders arrived. This is parallels how missionaries and imperial narratives created myths of the civilizing mission. Dune is deeply rooted in anti-colonial and post-colonial themes, and although it's a work of science fiction, it draws clear parallels to real-world colonial history. Frank Herbert's original novel 1965 was directly and indirectly influenced by 20th century geopolitics, especially Western involvement in the Middle East and the exploitation of natural resources. In fact, the first country in the Middle East to develop oil field was Iran in 1908. However, the profit from this oil went entirely to Britain, as it was British companies that developed and controlled the oil field. Still, Britain was not satisfied and turned its attention to neighboring Saudi Arabia. However, initial attempts to find oil there were unsuccessful. Disappointed, Britain handed over the opportunity to the United States. The US explored regions Britain had overlooked and eventually struck oil. This led to the founding of the Arabian American Oil Company or Aramco in partnership with Saudi Arabia. The ownership was split 50-50, and in return for Saudi Arabia agreeing to export oil exclusively to the United States, the US promised to guarantee the kingdom's security. Over time, however, King Faisal of Saudi Arabia, who is its third monarch, gradually bought out all of Aramco's shares. This was not done through force but by purchasing those shares step by step. Saudi Arabia was dissatisfied with depending on the United States for its national security and the equal shareholding structure of Aramco. After gaining full ownership, Faisal distanced the country from the United States, and during the Yom Kippur War, also known as the First Middle East War, restricted oil exports to nations supporting Israel and raised oil prices. This event triggered what became known as the First Oil Shock or Oil Crisis. After the end of the 8-year Iran-Iraq War in 1988, Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in August 1990. He justified the invasion by claiming that Western imperialist powers had artificially divided the region's borders, despite Iraq and Kuwait being united in religion, culture, and history. Combined, the oil production of Iraq and Kuwait rivaled that of Saudi Arabia. For the United States, however, it was essential that Saudi Arabia remained the dominant oil power in the region. This led President George Herbert Walker Bush to intervene militarily to protect US interests, which is a conflict that became known as the Gulf War. Many in the Middle East and the broader Arab world viewed US-led globalization with growing resentment. Although state-level resistance declined after witnessing America's military strength in the 1991 Gulf War, anti-American sentiment among individuals and extremist groups intensified. One of the most notorious figures to emerge was Osama bin Laden, a Saudi national who had once supported the US but later formed the terrorist organization Al-Qaeda in 1988. His decision to wage jihad against the United States stemmed from the stationing of American troops in Saudi Arabia during the Gulf War. For bin Laden and others, the presence of foreign soldiers in the Islamic Holy Land was a deep national and religious humiliation. Bin Laden was expelled from Saudi Arabia, relocated to Sudan, and eventually settled in Afghanistan, where he formed a relationship with Mullah Omar, who is the leader of the Taliban. The Taliban, a Sunni fundamentalist group, had previously received US support in their fight against the Soviet Union and were initially reluctant to align with bin Laden. However, bin Laden skillfully used media influence to tap into suppressed anger within the Islamic world, gaining support not just through cohesion but by appealing to shared grievances. This allowed him to rise to power, securing influence across social, political, and economic spheres. In 1998, Al-Qaeda bombed US embassies in Kenya and Tanzania, prompting the United States to retaliate with missile strikes in Afghanistan. In response, the Taliban chose to protect bin Laden. This alliance led to the planning and execution of September 11th terrorist attacks. The root of anger that culminated in the September 11th attacks can be traced back to a long history of Western imperialism and exploitation in the Middle East, including the creation of a non-Islamic state in Palestine and the unequal distribution of oil wealth during Western-led development. The Gulf War is defined as a war between civilizations, ultimately a conflict over whether the world's largest oil field will be managed by Christian countries such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, which entrust security to Western military power, or by anti-Western countries. Humanity in Dune has rejected thinking machines and instead pursues mental and spiritual augmentation. Characters like the Mentat, Bene Gesserit, and Paul represent human evolution, not via tech but through discipline, memories, and patience. This anticipates transhumanist ideas, but with a strong mystical and aesthetic flavor. Post-Humanism is an ideology that challenges and rejects humanism, which is the worldview that places humans at the center of meaning and value. Emerging in the 21st century within the tradition of critical theory and continental philosophy, Post-Humanism critiques anthropocentrism and advocates for a decentering of the human perspective. It encompasses ideas such as anti-humanism and antinatalism, which oppose key assumptions of traditional humanism. In recent discourse, post-humanism is sometimes confused with transhumanism, a distinct ideology that advocates for overcoming human limitations through technology. Paul Atreides is caught between prophecy and personal agency. He is seen as the Quetzalcoatl, a messianic figure bred through generations of genetic manipulation by the Bene Gesserit. This raises a profound question about whether Paul is choosing his path or he merely fulfilling a destiny predetermined by others. This steps into debate in existentialism, fatalism, and even Nietzschean eternal recurrence, where choices seem simultaneously autonomous and trapped by pattern. According to Nietzsche, through the concept of eternal return, we come to recognize our own tasks and missions. Embracing these responsibilities as our fate is what he calls amor fati, the love of one's fate. The following is an excerpt from Friedrich Nietzsche's posthumous fragment. If we consider the world as a certain quantity of force and as a certain number of forces, then in the grand game of existence, a game played with dice, the possible combinations of these forces most of the time repeat themselves. In infinite time, every possible combination will inevitably occur once, and not just once but infinitely many times. Between each recurrence of particular combination, in other words, return, an unimaginably vast number of other combinations must unfold. Since each of these combinations constitutes the same overall conditions in the same order, the recurrence of an absolutely identical sequence of cycles can be logically demonstrated. The Oedipus Complex, a psychoanalytic concept developed by Sigmund Freud, describes a child's unconscious desire for the opposite sex parent and jealousy toward the same-sex parent. While this idea is deeply rooted in classical psychoanalysis, it is often metaphorically applied to literature and film, especially when themes of fate, parent-child tension, and forbidden knowledge are present. In Denis Villeneuve's film Dune, there isn't a literal representation of Oedipus Complex, but the mystic structure and psychological undertones of Paul Atreides' journey carry strong symbolic parallels. The film explores the motif of destiny, maternal influence, and the son's emergence into autonomy, all resonate with Oedipal symbolism. Both Paul and Oedipus are trapped in destinies set before their birth. Their mothers try to protect or steer them, but ultimately play into the prophecy's hands. Lady Jessica's role becomes more pronounced as she ascends to position of Reverend Mother among the Fremen. Her actions, including the manipulation of religious prophecies to position Paul as the messianic figure, reflect a complex dynamic where maternal guidance borders on control. This dynamic underscores Paul's struggle to assert his identity separate from his mother's ambitions, echoing the Oedipal theme of the son's need to individuate from the maternal figure. In the myth world of Dune, the mother is never just a mother. She is oracle, architect, or beast. Duke Leto, Paul's father, is a noble and tragic figure. After Leto's death, Paul doesn't just inherit his father's role, he eclipses him, becoming something even greater, a messianic figure. In psychoanalytic terms, this resembles the killing of the father motif, symbolic of the son's rite of passage into autonomous adulthood. In this way, Paul unconsciously supplants his father, much like Oedipus does with King Laius, though Paul's rise is less about familial rivalry and more about destiny and systemic manipulation. Paul's vision of a future jihad and his role as a prophesied leader place him in a position where personal desires are subsumed by destiny. His internal conflict between embracing this path and resisting the loss of autonomy reflects the Oedipal struggle of reconciling personal identity with inherited roles and expectations. Each parent in their own world holds their child like a fragile egg, not knowing whether they have nurtured a dove or a dragon. Dune gives us the most volatile brew, love as both sanctuary and spell, where Jessica's every act of protection is also an act of prophecy. And Paul, like Oedipus, must decide, am I my parents' dream or am I my own becoming? Like Oedipus, who is doomed to fulfill a prophecy despite attempts to avoid it, Paul Atreides is caught in a web of destiny, shaped by Bene Gesserit genetic manipulation and religious myths. He is not just a boy becoming a man, but a figure fulfilling ancient prophecies that may lead to great suffering and violence, such as a jihad in his name. Dune enriches the narrative with layers that resonate with the Oedipus Complex not through direct representation but via symbolic and semantic parallels. Paul's evolution is marked by his navigation of maternal influence. The absence of paternal figure and the weight of destiny, all central to Oedipal journey of self-discovery and individuation. While Dune doesn't portray the Oedipus complex literally, its mystic structure, theme of inheritance, destiny, identity, and the complex psychological bond between Paul and Jessica make it fertile ground for symbolic or psychoanalytic reading. Paul Atreides' journey reflects the modernized, abstracted version of the Oedipal struggle that entangled with politics, religion, and colonialism as much as it is with family. The Bene Gesserit implant myths and manipulate belief systems across planets, seeding prophecies so they can later be fulfilled. The film critiques how religion can be manufactured, used to control, or weaponized, echoing Marx's opiate of the masses, but with more nuance. Historically, opium was a widely used drug and painkiller during Karl Marx's lifetime. When Marx referred to religion as the opium of the people, he wasn't merely comparing it to a medicinal pain reliever. He meant that religion not only offered temporary comfort in the face of suffering, but also encourages people to endure the harshness of reality, ultimately weakening their desire to change it. That's why he chose the word opium, a substance associated with sedation and dependence rather than a neutral term like painkiller. At that time, opium was commonly sold in British pharmacies, and even shocking advertisements like "Give your baby opium before going to work" appear in the newspapers. If you examine the context in which Marx wrote the phrase, "religion is the opium of the people" in his critique of Hegel's philosophy of right, we can clearly see his highly critical view of religion. He wrote, "The struggle against religion is therefore indirectly the struggle against the world, whose spiritual fragrance is religion. Religious suffering is at once the expression of real suffering, and a protest against real suffering. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of heartless world, and the center of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people, The abolition of religion as the illusory happiness of the people is the prerequisite for their real happiness. Calling on people to give up their illusions about their condition is to call on them to give up a condition that requires illusions. Therefore, criticism of religion is in its earliest form criticism of a veil of tears of which religion is the halo. As some have interpreted it, this criticism is like removing imaginary flowers from a chain, not to leave people in despair, but to help them break free from chain itself and reach for real living flowers. The critique of religion is meant to awaken people from illusion, to liberate them from false hope, and to restore their ability to feel and act. Ultimately, it is about becoming truly human thinking, acting and stepping out into the light of the real sun. Paul's rise as the Messiah also parallels real-world religious syncretism and explores how faith can birth both hope and fanaticism. In actual history, the Crusades, often remembered as brutal wars of slaughter, disguised as religious campaigns, were in part the result of efforts by the Pope and wandering preachers who sought to heal the schism within the Church and unite Christian powers under one authority, thereby increasing their influence within the feudal empire. These figures fervently promoted participation in the Crusades, inciting large numbers of people to join the expeditions. Among those who initially set out on the First Crusade, more than half were untrained commoners with no military experience. Many of these so-called People's Crusaders carried crude tools like hatchets, stone, farming implements, and sticks, hardly suitable for combat. Illiterate and blindly devout, many had no clear understanding of where Jerusalem even was. They recklessly followed the masses ahead of them. The Second Official Crusade, as we know it today, was also cloaked in the rhetoric of divine will, but over time it was transformed into a vehicle of personal ambition and the pursuit of political power. Superstition in Dune is a central theme that intersects with politics, religion, and colonialism. The film portrays superstition not just as irrational belief, but as a powerful tool that can be deliberately cultivated and exploited. Dune explores superstition as a tool of political manipulation, a self-fulfilling prophecy, a lens for colonized resistance, and a spiritual connection to nature, such as sensuum reverence. Rather than dismiss superstition, the film shows it as a force that can be sacred, dangerous, liberating, or corrupting, depending on who wields it and why. Real people believe in superstitions for many of the same reasons that characters in Dune do, because superstitions offer meaning, control, identity, and hope in uncertain and dangerous environment. In Denis Villeneuve's Dune, these reasons are magnified by extreme conditions, a harsh desert planet, political betrayal, and spiritual longing. To cope with uncertainty and danger, superstitions often arise in uncertain or life-threatening conditions like war, illness, or natural disaster. On Arrakis, life is harsh. Sandworms, dehydration, and political instability make survival precarious. The Fremen turn to spiritual beliefs and rituals as a way to make sense of danger and feel protected in a deadly world. In real life, people do the same, turning to rituals, lucky objects, or omens when faced with events they can't control like illness or natural disasters. To find meaning and purpose, Superstitions provide narratives that explain why things happen. The Fremen believe a Messiah will come to liberate them. This belief gives their suffering a larger cosmic meaning. They are not just desert survivors, they are part of a divine story. This mirrors how humans across cultures have used myth and religion to understand suffering, create identity, or justify long-term struggle. To feel control in powerless situations, in both Dune and real life, superstitions give people the illusion of control when they have very little. Reciting a prayer before battle, reading omens in the sand, or trusting in prophecy can create a psychological sense that someone is watching over us or this is meant to happen. Paul Atreides himself wrestles with this. He sees a possible future jihad in his name and must choose whether to try to control it or surrender to prophecy. Because superstitions are passed down, cultural beliefs and rituals are taught from generation to generation. The Fremen have inherited these beliefs as part of their identity, tied to ancestors, survival and resistance. Even if the origins of those beliefs, like the Bene Gesserit manipulation, are hidden, they remain socially and emotionally powerful. People often believe what their families or communities have always believed, not just for rational reasons, but because it connects them to a shared past, because they can be politically useful. Superstition can also be deliberately encouraged by those in power. In Dune, the Bene Gesserit plant prophecy to manipulate future generations. This shows how superstition can be engineered as a tool of social control, especially among colonized or oppressed people. In real history, colonial powers sometimes exploited or reshaped local beliefs to maintain dominance, just as in Dune. In essence, people believe in superstitions both in Dune and reality because they make the world feel less chaotic, offer hope and purpose, provide a shared identity, and sometimes are the only tool people have to resist, survive, or endure. Villeneuve's Dune doesn't mock superstitions. It shows that belief, even when manipulated, can be profoundly human and deeply powerful. As the Bene Gesserit voice as ritualized power over others will in Dune, the concepts of power and language are deeply intertwined and explored on multiple levels: political, spiritual, and psychological. The story reveals how language is not just a tool for communication, but a weapon, a means of control, and even a path to godhood. The Bene Gesserit use something called the voice, a precise, trained use of language that allows them to command others instantly, bypassing will and thought. It's not magic. It's based on deep knowledge of psychology, tone, and resonance. When Paul learns to use the voice, it marks the turning point. He's no longer just speaking, he's controlling. Language here equals direct power. If you can shape someone's perception, you can shape their actions. The Bene Gesserit planted prophecies among the Fremen long before Paul arrived, shaping their culture and beliefs using ancient stories, like placing verbal time bombs for future use. Paul inherits these myths and uses them strategically to gain the Fremen's trust. He walks the line between believing and performing a messianic role. Language builds myth. Myth controls people. Those who write the stories shape the future. power in Dune operates through subtle layered language. The Emperor speaks politely, but schemes in secret. The Harkonnens use threats and brutality, but they also lie fluently. The Atreides speak with honor, but even they play the political game. True power is hidden behind the words. Language becomes a veil or a weapon. The Fremen speak Chakopsa and use secret signals and desert terms that outsiders don't understand. Their language protects their culture, secret, and survival. When Paul learns their ways and language, he isn't just gaining knowledge, he is changing identity. Fremen preserve their language, rituals, and ecology, resisting cultural domination. When Paul adopts Fremen's way, it's partly survival, but it also reflects how hybrid identities emerge in colonized land. As real-world parallel, colonized peoples preserve their languages and traditions, such as Arabic, Swahili, Hindi, Berber, and indigenous American languages, despite pressure to assimilate. Language here is freedom and resistance. If you control your language, you protect your world. Firstly, as belief, the Fremen used language to anchor prophecy and power. Additionally, as control, the Bene Gesserit tried to decode language to control thought. Finally, as resistance through culture, the Fremen language cannot be fully understood by outsiders. It's more than vocabulary. It's worldview. In summary, in Dune, language is power. It shapes belief, commands bodies, hides intention, and builds or breaks empires. General semantics is a linguistic theory that examines the role of symbols, especially language in human life, and how people respond to them. Developed by Polish-American mathematician Alfred Korzybski in the 1930s, after his immigration to the United States, it is a type of behaviorist linguistic theory. Its central aim is to prevent misunderstandings and disorders caused by confusing abstract language with the concrete realities it represents. General semantics holds that much of human misfortune stems from the misuse of language and the breakdown of communication. It advocates avoiding overly abstract terms and vague generalizations. For instance, political figures or pseudo-religious leaders such as Hitler in the context of fascism and ideologies like communism or nationalism are often cited as examples of dangerous language misuse. The theory shares similarities with modern positivism and contemporary semantics, but it differs in focus. Unlike formal semantics, which is concerned with the interpretation of structured, logical language, general semantics makes broader claims about human behavior in social and political contexts. It emphasizes the importance of context in communication and challenges the rigid structure of Aristotelian logic. The chessboard metaphor in Dune, as well as the original novel by Frank Herbert, represents strategy, manipulation, and power dynamics, a symbolic way to frame how different characters or entire factions are being moved around by larger forces, much like pawns and pieces on a chessboard. Here's what the metaphor usually conveys in Dune. Paul Atreides is a piece becoming a player. Paul starts out as a noble hero, seemingly just another piece on the board. But as the story unfolds, he begins to understand the game, the political, religious, and ecological forces at play, and starts to shift from being moved to moving others. He transcends being a pawn. The Bene Gesserit is chess masters. The Bene Gesserit sisterhood are master manipulators, softly guiding bloodlines and politics across generations. They are not playing chess in one kingdom. They are playing four-dimensional chess across time and genetics. The Emperor and the houses are opposing players. House Atreides and House Harkonnen are positioned like rival chess pieces by the Emperor, who uses the Atreides' noble image and the Harkonnen's brutality to maintain his own power, a kind of divide and conquer strategy. The planet Arrakis itself is the board. Everyone wants control of it for spices, which fuels space travel, commerce, and power. But the Fremen, the people who live there, are seen by outsiders as minor pieces until they too begin to reshape the game. In short, the chessboard metaphor in Dune shows how people are often used in grand strategies by powerful forces, but also how those who understand the rules can rise to reshape them. Incredible visuals and sound design, faithful and intelligent adaptation, rich thematic narrative and world building, powerful ensemble performance, deep political and philosophical themes approach. But slow pacing, emotional distance, hollow moments, dense lore can be confusing for newcomers, and still feels like half a film or cons. Dune is not your typical space opera. It's more like a slow-burning myth carved in sand. Grand, thoughtful, and unapologetically serious. It rewards patience and contemplation, laying the foundation for something truly epic. Dune Part 2 is visually epic, emotionally layered continuation that heightened intensity, offers rich themes, and establishes Villeneuve is a true sci-fi author. It demands patience, and while not perfect, it delivers a grand, immersive journey that leaves you eager for the saga's conclusion.